which is some people just, doesn't matter what the truth is, think this way, and other people think that way. And that's...
Tim Burton, the visionary behind some of Hollywood's most iconic and twisted films, has finally revealed a darker side of his creative journey, naming the 5 actors he absolutely hated working with. Known for his eccentric style and loyal circle of collaborators, Burton rarely speaks ill of anyone. But in a shocking turn, he's breaking his silence, exposing behind-the-scenes tensions, on-set clashes, and performances that pushed him to the edge. So, who made the list? And what really went down? Get ready, as this revelation will change how you see his films forever. Number 5. Samuel L. Jackson. In truth, when you look closely at the film version of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, it's impossible not to notice that almost everyone on screen is white. Among the dozens of characters, children with odd talents, mysterious guardians, and villainous creatures, there is really only one major character who isn't white: Samuel L. Jackson's Baron. His presence alone stands out like a bright light in an otherwise uniform cast. When Tim Burton, the director famous for his gothic imagination and quirky visual style, sat down for an interview at New York's McKittrick Hotel to talk about the movie, he seemed a little uncomfortable as soon as the topic of diversity came up. It was as if the question pressed a hidden bruise. He shifted slightly in his seat, searching for the right words. These days, you hear people talking about diversity a lot more, he finally acknowledged, his voice betraying a hint of reluctance. He knew it was a subject that filmmakers could no longer brush aside. There was mounting pressure, an expectation that stories should resemble the real world, with people from all backgrounds given a chance to shine. But then, almost defensively, he added, "Things either call for things or they don't." He tried to explain that he never deliberately set out to exclude anyone. He recalled, perhaps, to prove he'd been thinking about these issues long before they became part of the cultural conversation. How, when he was growing up, he'd watched the Brady Bunch introduce characters of other races, seemingly just to appear politically correct. Instead of feeling enlightened by those attempts, he admitted that he'd actually felt irritated, even offended. To him, it looked like a hollow gesture, a superficial effort to look inclusive rather than a sincere attempt to reflect true diversity. But what seemed to affect Burton even more deeply, maybe in a way he didn't expect, was something Samuel L. Jackson said later in the same interview cycle. When a reporter asked Jackson what he thought about the almost all-white cast, Jackson didn't dodge the question. He didn't raise his voice or accuse anyone of anything. Instead, he responded in the cool, calm tone of someone stating a simple fact. "I actually had to stop and think about how many black actors have ever been in Tim's movies," Jackson remarked, with a kind of casual frankness that made his words cut deeper. "I might have been the first, or maybe just the most noticeable." He shrugged lightly, as if to say, "It is what it is." Then he added, "But it happens the way it happens. I don't think it's necessarily Tim's fault, or something wrong with the way he tells stories. It's just how things turned out." Jackson even took a moment to praise Burton, describing him as a really great guy. On the surface, his comments sounded polite, almost forgiving. But beneath that calm, Burton felt a quiet sting. Jackson's observation, so matter-of-fact, implied something that Burton could no longer deny. After all these years, after decades of making film after film, he had never really welcomed actors of color into his vivid, fantastical worlds. It was a truth that made Burton feel, in a way, uncomfortably exposed. He had always seen himself as a creative outsider, someone who championed the misfits, the lonely, the peculiar. Yet here he was, confronted with the realization that his work might have left out entire communities of people who were just as peculiar, just as deserving of a place in his stories. For Burton, the moment was more than just an awkward exchange in a press junket. It was a moment that chipped away at his sense of control over how he was perceived. He'd always been proud of his unique artistic vision, of the way his movies looked and felt unmistakably like his own. But now, he was forced to confront the idea that, whether by habit or blind spot, he had drawn the same kinds of faces over and over again. And those faces rarely looked like Samuel L. Jackson. Tim Burton didn't explode with anger, but he did feel a quiet resentment when criticized, realizing good intentions don't always protect against judgment. Reflecting later, he questioned whether he had been too quick to dismiss concerns about tokenism and diversity. Though he publicly insisted that stories should unfold naturally without forced inclusion, privately he wondered if expanding representation was worthwhile, even if it challenged his usual creative habits. Jackson's calm, honest words struck a nerve, making Burton consider that his imaginative worlds, however enchanting, might have lacked something vital. In that moment, he felt not just defensive, but also humbly aware. The next actor Tim Burton hates is a Superman who got on his nerves. Who is he? Why does Tim Burton hold a grudge against him? Let's find out. Number 4. Nicolas Cage. Tim Burton is no stranger to the ups and downs of Hollywood. As one of the most imaginative filmmakers of his generation, he's brought to life unforgettable worlds filled with gothic charm, quirky characters, and bold storytelling. But even for someone like him, who has experienced the high of massive box office success and the low of abrupt cancellations, some wounds never quite heal. And one such wound was recently reopened in a very unexpected way. Back in the late 1990s, Burton was working on a bold new project that had fans buzzing and the entertainment industry talking. Superman Lives. It wasn't just any Superman movie. It was meant to be a reimagining of the legendary superhero through Burton's unique lens, darker, weirder, more emotional. And at the center of this vision was the unlikely but intriguing casting choice of Nicolas Cage as the Man of Steel. The idea raised eyebrows, but Burton was passionate about it. He believed Cage could bring something fresh and human to the role. For nearly 2 years, Burton dedicated his time, energy, and creativity to this project, pouring his heart into every detail. He saw it as more than just another superhero movie. It was personal. Then, in a move that blindsided him, Warner Brothers shut the whole thing down. The studio got cold feet and canceled Superman Lives before it could ever take flight. It was a devastating blow for Burton. The project had been his baby, and to see it abandoned left him feeling crushed. For years, he tried to make peace with it. Like many directors, he knew not every vision sees the light of day. But the sting of that loss never quite left him. In 2023, Tim Burton is watching The Flash, another superhero film from the DC universe, when suddenly there's a surprise appearance. Nicolas Cage, finally dressed as Superman. For a brief moment on screen, the world gets a glimpse of what might have been. You'd think this might bring some closure, even a little bit of joy, but instead, it reopens an old wound. Burton didn't just feel disappointed by Cage's cameo. He felt hurt, deeply hurt. Around the same time, Cage made comments in an interview that felt like a dagger. When asked about Superman Lives and why it never happened, Cage casually mentioned that the failure of Burton's earlier film, Mars Attacks, made Warner Brothers nervous. The implication was clear. The financial flop of Mars Attacks made the studio doubt Burton's vision. And that doubt killed the Superman project. To the casual listener, it might have sounded like a throwaway remark, but to Burton, it felt like a betrayal. The actor Tim Burton, once defended, now blamed his film Mars Attacks for ruining their Superman Lives project. This wasn't just disappointing, it reopened old wounds. Burton, who had long struggled with the failure's reasons, felt hurt hearing such blame placed on a film he loved creating. For Burton, the comment did more than bring back bad memories. It highlighted a pattern he'd grown increasingly tired of: Hollywood's habit of mining his past work for nostalgia while showing little respect for the original artistry. Over the years, he has watched the industry recycle, remix, and reference his creations, sometimes even inserting his characters or ideas into new projects without asking for his input. The surprise appearance of Cage's Superman in The Flash was just another example of this trend. It felt like the studio was capitalizing on his vision without acknowledging his pain or his efforts. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Burton opened up about how all of this had affected him. He described being in a state of quiet revolt, not loud, not public, but simmering. A slow-burning resentment had taken root. He wasn't staging a grand protest or calling anyone out by name. But inside, he was pulling away, withdrawing his creative energy from a system he felt had used and discarded him. And that quiet revolt wasn't just against the studio. It may have extended in some unspoken way to Nicolas Cage, the actor he once stood behind so fiercely. To feel betrayed by someone you believed in can be harder to forgive than a corporate decision made in a boardroom. What makes this entire episode so poignant is how human it is. Behind the glitz of movie premieres and the buzz of superhero franchises are artists who feel deeply, who dream boldly, and who get hurt when their visions are dismissed or mishandled. Tim Burton's experience with Superman Lives isn't just a story about a movie that never got made. It's about passion, loyalty, and heartbreak. It's about the emotional cost of creativity in an industry that often prioritizes profits over people. For Burton, the ghost of Superman Lives continues to haunt, not just because it was never completed, but because of what it represented: a moment of trust, risk, and belief that was ultimately shattered. And now, years later, that ghost has returned in the form of a CGI cameo and a few careless words, rekindling old pain and reminding us that even the most visionary minds can bleed when their art is misunderstood. In his quiet way, Tim Burton has made it clear: some wounds never fully heal, especially when they come from the very people you once believed were flying beside you. The next most hated actor on the list is one whose movie Tim Burton decided to remake after criticizing, which got him some jabs from the actor. Who is this actor? What exactly transpired? Let's dive into the details. Number 3. Gene Wilder. In 2004, when director Tim Burton set out to create Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he knew he was stepping into territory that already had a devoted fan base. The original 1971 film, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, starring Gene Wilder, had become a classic loved by generations. But Burton had a vision of his own. He didn't just want to recreate the old movie, he wanted to bring Roald Dahl's book back to life in a way that felt fresh and true to its darker, quirkier spirit. However, from the very beginning, Burton didn't hide his feelings about the earlier film. He openly criticized the 1971 version, suggesting it strayed too far from Dahl's original story. To Burton, it seemed overly sweet and sentimental, lacking the sharp edge he thought the book deserved. He spoke plainly about his dislike, perhaps not realizing how his words would echo back to the people who had made the first film so beloved. At the same time, Johnny Depp, who was cast as Willy Wonka in Burton's adaptation, approached the legacy of Gene Wilder with far more caution and respect. Depp knew that Wilder's performance was iconic. In interviews, he described it as brilliant but subtle, a portrayal that managed to be both whimsical and slightly unsettling, without going over the top. Depp wanted to carve out his own version of Wonka, but still acknowledged how much Wilder had contributed to the character's enduring charm. Gene Wilder himself seemed to appreciate this gesture. He respected Depp for his kind words and for recognizing the artistry of his original performance. But when it came to Burton's film as a whole, Wilder was not so gracious. His reaction wasn't just mild disappointment or gentle critique. It was fierce and blunt, tinged with real anger. Wilder questioned why the new film needed to exist at all. In his eyes, it wasn't about celebrating Dahl's story or offering something meaningful to audiences. He believed it was simply a cash grab, a cynical move by a major studio to squeeze money out of nostalgia. He called it a money-making venture, words that cut deep into the heart of Burton's project. No matter how much Burton insisted that his movie was a reimagining, not a remake, Wilder wasn't convinced. To Burton, these accusations stung badly. He had grown up loving Dahl's work and felt he was finally doing justice to the story's darker layers. He wanted to create a film that was strange, vivid, and slightly unsettling in the way Dahl's tales often were. So when Wilder dismissed it all as a Warner Brothers insult, Burton felt personally attacked, as though his creative passion had been reduced to nothing more than corporate greed. Wilder's words didn't soften over time either. Nearly a decade later, in 2013, he was still openly criticizing the film. In an interview, he called it an insult, repeating that he saw no purpose in redoing something that had already been done well. He also indirectly jabbed at Burton himself, saying he disapproved of Tim Burton doing stuff like he did. It wasn't just a knock on the film's quality. It was a remark that questioned Burton's entire style as a director. For Burton, this felt like more than just a professional critique. It felt like an attack on his integrity and his reasons for making art. Wilder's sharp disapproval left a mark that didn't fade quickly. While some filmmakers might have shrugged off such criticism as the natural consequence of working in Hollywood, Burton took it personally. In private moments, he would reflect on how painful it was to be judged so harshly by someone he had admired. The tension between Burton and Wilder revealed something deeper about how creative people respond to their work being revisited. For Wilder, the first film wasn't just a project he did and moved on from. It was a part of his life and legacy. He felt protective of it, almost as if it belonged to him as much as it did to the fans. Burton, on the other hand, believed that every generation deserved its own version of the story, shaped by new ideas and a different sensibility. Neither man was necessarily wrong, but their perspectives clashed in a way that made reconciliation impossible. Even Johnny Depp, who had tried to bridge the gap with respectful praise, couldn't heal the rift. Though he honored Wilder's contribution, his own performance was judged through the lens of the original. Every little detail, from the pale makeup to the soft, childlike voice, was compared to Wilder's portrayal. And because Burton had spoken so critically about the first film, his version seemed, to some, almost like a deliberate rejection of what came before. In the end, Wilder's reaction did more than generate headlines. It left Tim Burton with a lingering bitterness. Here was a director who had poured his imagination into creating something new, only to be told it was worthless and offensive. Wilder's blunt words stayed with him long after the film had premiered, and the box office numbers were counted. They were a reminder that no matter how hard you work or how sincere your intentions are, Someone can always see your creation as nothing but an insult. This story of clashing visions and wounded pride shows just how complicated it can be to reimagine a beloved tale. It isn't only about adapting a story for a new generation. It's also about respecting the memories attached to it. And sometimes, no matter how carefully you try to balance homage with originality, you can't avoid stepping on old toes. The lady Tim Burton was once engaged to is another Hollywood star that happens to hate. What was the serious thing that made the duo separate? Why did they stop performing after their separation? Let's delve into the details. Number 2. Lisa Marie. Lisa Marie Smith, who most people simply knew as Lisa Marie, was a striking figure whose presence turned heads wherever she went. Before she ever stepped onto a movie set, she had already carved out a place for herself in the world of fashion, modeling for big names like Calvin Klein. She seemed destined for an extraordinary life, but no one could have guessed just how entwined her story would become with one of Hollywood's most imaginative directors. Her path crossed with Tim Burton's on New Year's Eve in 1992. The evening felt charged with possibility, and from the moment they met, something clicked between them. They were drawn to each other almost instantly, as though they shared a secret language. While many Hollywood romances flame out as quickly as they spark, theirs quickly grew serious. By the time 1993 rolled around, they were engaged. In the years that followed, Lisa Marie became much more than Burton's fiancée. She was his muse, his companion, and a familiar face in many of his films. Whether it was a small part or a more central role, she appeared again and again in his creative projects, and people began to see her as an essential part of his unusual Gothic world. Together, they built a life that blurred the line between the professional and the personal. But just as their story seemed set in stone, cracks began to appear. Everything changed in 2001, shortly after the premiere of Planet of the Apes. The production of that movie had been complicated, and tensions simmered behind the scenes. For Lisa Marie, it wasn't simply the stress of the work that troubled her. It was the way Tim Burton had behaved during filming, especially when it came to Helena Bonham Carter, one of the film's stars. Lisa Marie had noticed how Burton and Bonham Carter grew increasingly close. To her, their connection looked far more intimate than a professional collaboration. Feelings of unease soon turned into heartbreak. When the film finally premiered, she could no longer keep quiet about the disappointment and betrayal she felt. In interviews and conversations, she spoke openly about how Burton's behavior had hurt her, describing her sense of disillusionment in vivid detail. Her honesty made headlines. She didn't hold back her emotions, and the public quickly picked up on her pointed words. To Burton, these revelations felt like a deep wound. He had always been private, almost secretive about his personal life, preferring to let his movies speak for him. Having the woman he'd shared nearly a decade with pull back the curtain on their troubles left him raw and defensive. The fallout was swift and final. Burton broke off the engagement. But ending their relationship wasn't enough for him. He also demanded that Lisa Marie sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. It was as if he needed to build a wall of silence between them, to keep the world from learning anything more about their years together. That document bound her to secrecy, forcing her to lock away the memories of their shared life. Even after they officially separated in 2006, the bitterness between them refused to fade. Burton carried a deep sense of resentment, a feeling that he had been exposed in a way he could never forgive. It wasn't just that their romance had ended. It was that she had made their private pain public, stripping away the mystery he so carefully cultivated around his image. For Lisa Marie, speaking out had been an act of honesty, a way to reclaim her story after years of feeling overshadowed by Burton's creative empire. But for him, her candidness felt like a betrayal he would never be able to accept. The hurt lingered on both sides, a sharp reminder of how love can transform into something cold and unrecognizable when trust shatters. What began as a whirlwind connection, two creative spirits drawn together under New Year's Eve lights, ended in silence and bitterness. Lisa Marie's willingness to reveal what she had seen and felt behind closed doors marked the final rupture. In the end, the couple who once seemed inseparable parted ways, leaving behind only memories and a trail of regret neither of them could fully escape. Tim Burton went on to work with Helena Bonham Carter for years after the split, cementing the impression that the closeness Lisa Marie had suspected was real. To many, it looked like a cruel twist of fate. The woman who had been Burton's muse and partner for nearly a decade was erased from his public story, while her successor took on that role in both his films and his personal life. Long after their separation, the echoes of their broken bond continued to haunt them. Burton's resentment never quite disappeared, and Lisa Marie's frankness about their time together remained a defining moment in both of their lives. It was proof that no matter how dazzling a love story may appear at first glance, the reality behind the scenes can be far messier and far more human than anyone imagines. Tim Burton later dated another Hollywood star, but she also ended up on his list of his most hated actors. So, did they separate? Was there any form of betrayal? Let's dig into the details. Number 1. Helena Bonham Carter. In 2001, Helena Bonham Carter and American filmmaker Tim Burton crossed paths in a way that would change both of their lives. They first met on the set of Planet of the Apes, a film that would not only mark the beginning of an artistic partnership, but also ignite a romance that fascinated Hollywood. From that point on, the pair seemed inseparable, blending their creative visions and private lives in a way that made them one of the most recognizable couples in the film world. Over the next decade, Burton gave Bonham Carter a place in almost every one of his projects. She became a kind of muse for him, appearing in Big Fish, lending her voice to the haunting stop-motion world of Corpse Bride, and stepping into the curious chocolate-smeared world of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. She transformed herself in each role, sometimes darkly comedic, sometimes tragic, always memorable. The collaborations kept coming. Sweeney Todd, where she sang alongside Johnny Depp, Alice in Wonderland, with her cartoonishly oversized head as the Red Queen, and Dark Shadows, the gothic vampire comedy. Many believed their professional bond was unbreakable, a perfect mix of Burton's strange imagination and Bonham Carter's chameleon-like talent. Yet, behind the scenes, their personal relationship was more complex than the fairy tale image suggested. They were known for their unusual living arrangements, separate houses connected by a hallway, and for the way they blurred the lines between work and home. Some insiders quietly wondered whether this closeness might one day backfire. Eventually, it did. In December 2014, after more than a decade together, they announced their separation. The news sent ripples through the entertainment world. Fans who had admired their creative and romantic partnership were stunned. But the split wasn't just painful in private. It unfolded publicly in ways neither could have predicted. In interviews after the breakup, Bonham Carter spoke with surprising candor about how their working relationship might actually improve now that they were no longer romantically involved. With a mix of humor and pointed criticism, she remarked that collaborating on films could be simpler because, in her words, "He always only cast me with great embarrassment." She made it sound as though Burton felt awkward about giving her roles, as if he worried people would think she was only getting parts because she was his partner. Those comments landed with the force of a slap. People close to Burton said he felt not just saddened, but humiliated. He had long insisted that he cast Bonham Carter because she was a brilliant actress, not out of any sense of obligation. To hear her publicly suggest that he was embarrassed to work with her, and to imply that their entire professional history was clouded by personal discomfort, cut him deeply. While the split itself was painful enough, it was these remarks that seemed to sting the most. They revealed hidden insecurities and resentments that had built up over years of living and working together. For Burton, it wasn't only the end of their relationship that hurt. It was the idea that she might have felt diminished or second-guessed every time he put her in front of the camera. Bonham Carter, for her part, didn't shy away from describing how hard the aftermath was. She called divorce utterly bewildering, like waking up in a world where none of the rules made sense anymore. Even though she tried to speak openly about her grief and confusion, the comments about Burton and their collaborations lingered in the public imagination. Some saw her words as refreshingly honest. Others thought they were unnecessarily cruel. The separation marked the end of an era in both their lives. For years, their names had been linked in almost every headline about Burton's movies. She was more than just a frequent collaborator. She was his partner, his confidant, the person who shared his peculiar creative universe. When they parted ways, it wasn't just their home life that fractured. Their artistic partnership cracked too, leaving a sense of unfinished business. Burton never directly responded to Bonham Carter's comments, but friends said he withdrew into himself, haunted by the idea that she had always believed he was ashamed to work with her. It was as if all those films they'd made together, so full of dark beauty and eccentric charm, were now colored by embarrassment and resentment. In a strange twist, the professional collaboration they once believed was their greatest strength had turned into a painful reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Looking back, their story isn't just about a famous couple who made movies together and then grew apart. It's about how love, pride, and creativity can tangle into something almost impossible to untangle without leaving scars. Even years after their separation, people still find their partnership fascinating. The way it ended, with quiet heartbreak and sharp words, only added to the intrigue. Helena Bonham Carter and Tim Burton created some of the most unforgettable images in modern cinema. But behind the Gothic sets and fantastical characters, they were simply two people trying to hold their lives and their hearts together. When that effort finally failed, it left them both grappling with the same question. How do you separate love from work when, for so long, they were the same? So, do you think Tim Burton was wrong to hate these actors? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.